Racist HR manager insults black man in a wheelchair, unaware that he is the company's CEO. Mr. Thompson, let me be frank with you. I've been in HR for 15 years, and I've seen every kind of situation that walks through those doors. She gestured toward the hallway with a dismissive wave. We follow all federal guidelines here. We have our quotas, our designated parking spaces, our special bathrooms. What more exactly are you expecting? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The wheelchair squeaked slightly as Dwayne rolled past the reception desk, and he caught the HR manager's look, that familiar mixture of pity and disdain that always came before the words that would change everything. Dwayne Thompson had learned to read faces long before he'd learned to read boardrooms. 38 years of navigating a world built for people who looked nothing like him had honed his ability to spot prejudice from across a crowded elevator. The slight tightening around the eyes, the almost imperceptible backward lean, the way conversations quieted when he approached. He catalogued it all with the precision of a scientist studying specimens. This morning, rolling through the marble lobby of Meridian Corporate Solutions, he felt that familiar electric anticipation that came before important discoveries. The building belonged to him, though only 3 people in the world knew that. The rest saw exactly what they expected: a black man in a wheelchair, probably here for some diversity initiative or seeking employment assistance. Perfect. The elevator chimed softly as he pressed the button for the 15th floor. His reflection in the polished doors showed a man dressed in a crisp navy suit, his hand steady on the wheels of his custom titanium chair. His dark eyes held flecks of gold that caught the light when he was thinking, which was almost always. A small scar ran along his left temple, barely visible now but a reminder of the car accident that had changed everything 12 years ago. Most people saw the chair first. Dwayne had learned to use that blindness to his advantage. 3 floors up, Linda Hartwell was having what she privately called a diversity day. The morning had already brought 2 interviews with candidates who didn't quite fit the Meridian image: an older woman with gray hair who'd had the audacity to ask about flexible scheduling, and a young man with an accent she couldn't quite place who'd somehow made her feel defensive about her own qualifications. Linda had built her career on her ability to spot the right people for Meridian. In her 15 years as senior HR manager, she'd cultivated an eye for candidates who would mesh well with company culture code words that helped her sleep at night while maintaining the carefully cultivated demographic that made board meetings feel like country club gatherings. She adjusted the small American flag pin on her burgundy blazer and checked her reflection in her computer screen. 44 years old, blonde hair professionally styled, makeup applied with the precision of someone who understood that appearance mattered in ways that nobody talked about but everyone knew. Her office walls displayed her MBA from a state school she'd elevated to Ivy League status in casual conversation, and photos of her with various corporate executives who'd never remember her name but whose proximity lent her borrowed importance. The morning's interviews had left her feeling slightly off balance, questioning instincts that had served her well. She dressed down both candidates with subtle efficiency, pointing out gaps in experience that seemed more like excuses to her own ears. But they'd both thanked her politely and left without complaint, which somehow made it worse. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder: 10:30 a.m., accessibility consultation, Dwayne Thompson. Linda frowned. She couldn't remember scheduling this meeting, and the name meant nothing to her. Probably another compliance requirement, someone from the state pushing more regulations about wheelchair ramps and bathroom modifications that would cost the company money they didn't need to spend. Meridian already met the minimum requirements, barely, but legally, and these advocacy people never seemed satisfied. She pulled up his file and found almost nothing. No employee ID number, no department listing, just an appointment slot that appeared to have been added directly to the system. IT must have made an error, or maybe someone in legal had scheduled it without consulting her. Either way, she'd handle it efficiently and get back to real work. Dwayne rolled into the elevator with two other passengers, who immediately found their shoes fascinating. The silence stretched uncomfortably until they reached their floors, each exit accompanied by the kind of forced politeness that acknowledged his existence while maintaining maximum distance. He'd grown used to being a ghost in corporate spaces. People looked through him, spoke around him, made decisions about him without including him. It had taken years to realize that this invisibility, while painful, was also powerful. When people didn't see you as a threat, they revealed their true nature without filters. The 15th floor reception area buzzed with quiet activity. Administrative assistants moved between desks with practiced efficiency, their heels clicking against polished tile in rhythms that spoke of routine and purpose. Dwayne noted the small details that most visitors missed: the way conversations paused when he entered, the subtle repositioning of bodies that created clearer pathways while maintaining distance, the careful eye contact that lasted exactly long enough to seem polite without inviting engagement. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist, a young woman whose smile seemed genuine until it reached her eyes. "I have a 10:30 appointment with Linda Hartwell." The receptionist's fingers flew across her keyboard, her expression shifting to that particular brand of professional confusion reserved for situations that didn't fit standard protocols. "I'm sorry, could you spell your last name for me?" Dwayne spelled it out patiently, watching her frown deepen with each letter. He knew exactly what was happening. His name existed in the system at a level her access couldn't reach, creating one of those bureaucratic mysteries that frustrated low-level employees and amused him endlessly. "I'm showing the appointment," she said finally, "but I don't have any background information. Are you here about building accessibility?" The assumption landed with familiar weight. "Something like that," Dwayne replied, his voice carrying just enough ambiguity to maintain the mystery while confirming her expectations. "She's in conference room C," the receptionist said, pointing down a hallway lined with frosted glass doors. "I'll let her know you're here." As Dwayne rolled toward the conference room, he caught fragments of whispered conversation: another compliance visit. Probably expensive modifications. Linda won't be happy. He smiled to himself. Linda Hartwell was about to have the most educational 30 minutes of her career. What assumptions do we make about people based on first impressions? Share a time when someone surprised you by being completely different than you expected. Conference room C felt smaller than it looked from the hallway. Dwayne rolled through the doorway, immediately cataloging the space. Polished table that could seat 12, windows facing north with a view of the city's financial district, and Linda Hartwell standing at the far end with her back to him, rifling through papers with a kind of aggressive efficiency that spoke of irritation. She turned when she heard his wheels on the carpet, and Dwayne watched her expression shift through a series of micro-emotions: surprise, annoyance, and something else that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the particular tone reserved for children and people she considered beneath her attention. "I have to say, I'm not sure why this meeting was scheduled. Our building is fully ADA compliant." Dwayne positioned his chair across from where she stood, noting that she didn't sit down, a power play as obvious as it was petty. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, Ms. Hartwell. I'm sure your schedule is very demanding." "It is." Linda remained standing, arms crossed, her burgundy blazer like armor against any possibility of connection. "So perhaps we can make this brief. What exactly are you here to advocate for?" The word advocate dripped with disdain, as if she'd tasted something sour. Dwayne felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came before moments like this, the body's preparation for psychological combat. "I'm interested in learning more about Meridian's commitment to diversity and inclusion," he said carefully, his voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. Linda let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Mr. Thompson, let me be frank with you. I've been in HR for 15 years, and I've seen every kind of situation that walks through those doors." She gestured toward the hallway with a dismissive wave. "We follow all federal guidelines here. We have our quotas, our designated parking spaces, our special bathrooms. What more exactly are you expecting? Quotas. The word hit like a physical blow, but Dwayne kept his expression neutral. I'm not expecting anything beyond what any person deserves: respect and equal opportunity. Respect is earned, Mr. Thompson. Linda's voice sharpened, and she finally sat down, but perched on the edge of her chair like she was ready to bolt. And opportunity? Well, that requires certain qualifications. She opened a folder and pulled out what appeared to be a generic application form, sliding it across the table toward him. If you're looking for employment, I should tell you up front that most of our positions require extensive travel, long hours, physical demands that might be challenging for someone in your situation. The words "your situation" hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dwayne looked down at the application, a standard form he recognized because he'd approved its design 3 years ago when Meridian had updated their hiring processes. My situation, he repeated slowly, tasting the words. Don't misunderstand me, Linda continued, her tone suggesting she was being generous with her honesty. I'm sure you're very capable in certain areas. But Meridian has a reputation to maintain. Our clients expect a certain level of presentation. Professional image matters in this industry. Dwayne felt something cold settle in his stomach. In 38 years, he'd heard every variation of this conversation, but Linda Hartwell was delivering it with a masterclass in coded language that danced right up to the line of legal liability without quite crossing it. What kind of presentation are you looking for? He asked. Linda's smile was sharp as broken glass. Someone who can represent our values. Someone who fits our company culture. Someone who won't make clients uncomfortable or require special accommodations that draw attention to differences. The silence that followed was deafening. Dwayne could hear the hum of the building's HVAC system, the distant murmur of voices in the hallway, the soft tick of Linda's watch. But mostly, he heard the thunderous echo of every similar conversation he'd endured over the decades, every time someone had looked at his dark skin and his wheels and decided his worth before he'd spoken a word. Mr. Thompson, Linda continued, apparently taking his silence as defeat, I'm going to be honest with you because I think you seem like a nice person. Companies like Meridian, we have standards. We have expectations. And sometimes, well, sometimes people just aren't the right fit, no matter how much they might want to be. She leaned back in her chair, her expression a mixture of pity and self-satisfaction. I know there are laws, quotas we have to meet. But between you and me, there are ways to work within the system. Background checks that reveal character issues. Reference checks that raise concerns. Skills assessments that demonstrate gaps. Dwayne's hands tightened imperceptibly on his armrests. I see. I thought you might. Linda's voice carried the smugness of someone who believed she just delivered hard truth with compassionate honesty. Look, I'm not saying you couldn't find something somewhere. Maybe a nonprofit, or some government position where they're looking for your type. But Meridian? We're private sector. We're competitive. We can't afford to carry dead weight. Dead weight. The words landed like a physical slap, and for a moment, Dwayne felt 12 years old again, listening to a teacher explain why he couldn't participate in the school play because his wheelchair would be distracting. He felt 25 again, watching a potential employer's enthusiasm evaporate the moment they saw him roll into the interview room. He felt every age he'd ever been when someone had decided his limitations for him. But he also felt something else, a cold, crystalline clarity that came with absolute certainty about what needed to happen next. Dead weight, he repeated, his voice so quiet that Linda had to lean forward to hear him. I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. But sometimes the truth is harsh. Sometimes people need to hear it so they can adjust their expectations accordingly. Dwayne nodded slowly, his mind working through possibilities, consequences, and the precise calculation of justice. Ms. Hartwell, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you enjoy your work here at Meridian? The question seemed to surprise her. Yes. I've built a career here. I'm good at what I do. And what exactly do you think you do? Linda straightened, sensing something had shifted in the conversation, but not understanding what. I protect this company. I make sure we hire the right people, the people who will contribute to our success rather than detract from it. The right people, Dwayne said, his voice still dangerously quiet. Yes. People who understand what it means to work at a company like Meridian. Dwayne smiled then, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a chess player who'd just seen checkmate in 3 moves. Ms. Hartwell, he said, I think I understand perfectly what it means to work at a company like Meridian. The silence that followed Dwayne's words stretched like a taut wire between them. Linda felt something shift in the air, a subtle change in temperature, in pressure, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. But she couldn't quite identify what had changed, only that the man across from her was looking at her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of her own heartbeat. Well, she said, clearing her throat and shuffling the papers in front of her with unnecessary precision. I'm glad we could have this honest conversation. I think it's better when expectations are clear from the beginning, don't you? Dwayne didn't respond immediately. He was studying her face with the kind of focused attention that made Linda want to check her makeup, smooth her hair, adjust her blazer. It was the look of someone cataloging details for future reference. Crystal clear, he finally said. Linda stood up, signaling the end of the meeting with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd perfected the art of polite dismissal. I'll make sure someone from facilities gets in touch if we need any accessibility consultations in the future. Thank you for your time, Mr. Thompson. She extended her hand across the table, a gesture meant to appear gracious while maintaining physical distance. Dwayne looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment before reaching out to shake it. His grip was firm, his skin warm, and Linda found herself surprised by the calluses on his palms. Working hands. Strong hands. The pleasure was all mine, Ms. Hartwell, he said, and something in his tone made her stomach flutter with unease. This has been extraordinarily educational. As Dwayne rolled toward the door, Linda felt compelled to add, I hope you understand, it's nothing personal. It's just business. Dwayne paused in the doorway, his back still to her. Of course. Nothing personal at all. After he left, Linda sank back into her chair and stared at the closed door. She should have felt satisfied. She'd handled the situation with professional efficiency, made the company's position clear without saying anything that could be recorded or reported. She'd protected Meridian from what could have been a costly hiring mistake. So why did she feel like she'd just made one herself? Linda shook her head, dismissing the uncomfortable sensation. This was what 15 years of experience had taught her: how to recognize problems before they became lawsuits, how to maintain standards without appearing discriminatory, how to protect the company's interests while staying within legal boundaries. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, finding the number for building security. This is Linda Hartwell in HR. I need you to make a note that Dwayne Thompson is not authorized for unsupervised access to the building. He was here for a consultation, but future visits should be pre-approved and escorted. The security guard on the other end acknowledged her request with professional indifference. Just another protocol update, another name added to the watch list. Linda hung up and immediately felt better. Control restored, boundaries re-established. Meanwhile, 3 floors down in the marble lobby, Dwayne sat motionless in his chair near the elevator bank. To anyone passing by, he appeared to be checking his phone, but his mind was elsewhere entirely, replaying every word, every gesture, every micro-expression from his encounter with Linda Hartwell. He'd experienced racism before. He'd faced ableism countless times. But rarely had he encountered someone who wielded both with such calculated precision, such deliberate cruelty disguised as professional courtesy. Linda Hartwell wasn't just prejudiced. She was proud of her prejudice, convinced it made her good at her job. Dwayne thought about the employees of Meridian Corporate Solutions, the hundreds of people who worked in this building, whose livelihoods depended on decisions made by people like Linda Hartwell. How many qualified candidates had she turned away with similar conversations? How many dreams had she crushed with her careful, coded language? His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Do you need anything prepared? Dwayne typed back, cancel my afternoon meetings. I'll be staying in the building for a while longer. Everything all right? Dwayne looked up at the gleaming lobby around him, his lobby, his building, his company, and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. Just conducting some field research, he replied. Back on the 15th floor, Linda was struggling to concentrate on her afternoon interviews. She kept replaying moments from her conversation with Dwayne Thompson, picking apart her own words, questioning instincts that had never failed her before. She'd been honest with him, hadn't she? Direct but fair. She'd saved him from the humiliation of applying for positions he'd never qualify for, saved the company from the awkwardness of rejecting someone who clearly didn't understand corporate realities. But his eyes. Linda pushed the thought away. She was being ridiculous. The man was probably used to playing victim, used to making people feel guilty for stating obvious truths. It was manipulation, emotional blackmail designed to override common-sense business decisions. Her next interview was with a candidate for the marketing department, a young white woman with an impressive resume and the right kind of smile. Exactly the sort of person who would represent Meridian well, who would fit seamlessly into the company culture Linda had spent years cultivating. Tell me about your vision for corporate marketing in today's landscape, Linda asked, settling into the familiar rhythm of evaluation and judgment. As the candidate launched into a polished response about brand positioning and target demographics, Linda felt her equilibrium returning. This was her domain, her expertise. She knew how to spot the winners, how to separate the wheat from the chaff. But even as she nodded and took notes, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a question she didn't want to acknowledge. What if she was wrong? What if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her career? Linda silenced the voice with practiced efficiency. She'd built her reputation on trusting her instincts, and her instincts had never steered her wrong. Dwayne Thompson was exactly what she'd thought he was, a compliance headache, a lawsuit waiting to happen, a problem she'd solved before it could become her problem. She was absolutely certain of it. The certainty felt as fragile as spun glass. The fire alarm's piercing shriek cut through the afternoon, quiet like a blade through silk. Linda looked up from her computer screen, irritation flashing across her face as the sound bounced off the conference room walls. False alarms were becoming more frequent lately, probably another construction crew hitting the wrong wire in the building's endless renovations. She gathered her files with practiced efficiency, muttering under her breath about lost productivity and interrupted interviews. The hallway filled with the controlled chaos of corporate evacuation, employees streaming toward stairwells, conversations continuing despite the alarm's insistence, the particular brand of annoyance that came with routine disruption. Linda joined the flow of people moving toward the nearest exit, her heels clicking against polished floors in rhythm with dozens of others. The evacuation was orderly, professional, exactly what she'd expect from Meridian's well-trained workforce. It wasn't until she reached the stairwell that she realized the problem. The crowd had backed up, people pressed together in the narrow space, voices rising in confusion and frustration. Linda pushed forward, trying to see what was causing the delay, and felt her stomach drop when she spotted the issue. Dwayne Thompson sat in his wheelchair at the top of the stairs, perfectly calm while chaos swirled around him. "What's the holdup?" someone behind Linda demanded. "Can't he just—" "I don't know, walk down," another voice whispered, apparently unaware that wheelchairs weren't typically occupied by people who could walk. Linda watched as a maintenance worker approached Dwayne, shouting over the alarm. "Sir, we need to get everyone out of the building. The elevators are locked down during fire procedures." "I understand," Dwayne replied, his voice carrying despite the noise. "Do you have an evacuation chair?" The maintenance worker's blank expression said everything. Of course they didn't have an evacuation chair. Despite all of Linda's assurances about ADA compliance, Despite the minimum requirements they met so carefully, no one had thought about how to get a wheelchair user down 15 flights of stairs during an emergency. The crowd was getting restless, pressed together in the stairwell's confined space. Linda could feel the heat of bodies around her, smell someone's coffee breath, hear the growing irritation in voices that had started polite and were rapidly becoming less so. "Look," a man in an expensive suit said, pushing past Linda to address Dwayne directly. "Can't you just figure something out? The rest of us need to get downstairs." Linda watched Dwayne's face as the man spoke, saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not fear, not embarrassment, but a weary recognition that she was beginning to understand all too well. "I'm working on it," Dwayne said evenly. "Work faster," the man snapped. "Some of us have real jobs to get back to." The words hit Linda like ice water. Real jobs. As if Dwayne's presence here was somehow less legitimate, less urgent than anyone else's. She found herself looking around the stairwell with new eyes, seeing the faces of her colleagues, her company, the people she'd spent years hiring and promoting and protecting. None of them were helping. They were all just waiting, complaining, treating Dwayne like an inconvenient obstacle rather than a human being in need of assistance. "There has to be someone who knows the procedure," Linda heard herself saying. The word surprised her. She hadn't consciously decided to speak. Several people turned to look at her, including Dwayne, whose expression shifted from resignation to something resembling curiosity. "Ma'am, are you from facilities?" the maintenance worker asked hopefully. "HR," Linda replied automatically, then realized what she'd just committed herself to. "But someone has to know the evacuation protocol for disabled employees." "We could carry him," suggested a young man from accounting, apparently oblivious to the logistics of maneuvering a wheelchair down 15 flights of narrow stairs. "Absolutely not," Linda said sharply, surprising herself again. "That's dangerous for everyone involved." She pulled out her phone and dialed building security, pushing past the crowd to get closer to the stairwell entrance where the connection might be clearer. The alarm continued its relentless shrieking, but she could just make out the voice on the other end. "This is Linda Hartwell, HR. We have a situation in Stairwell B. We need emergency evacuation assistance for a wheelchair user on the 15th floor." As she spoke, Linda became aware that Dwayne was watching her with intense concentration. Not gratitude exactly, but something more complex, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that she was part of. "They're sending someone up with proper equipment," she announced to the crowd, which responded with a mixture of relief and continued grumbling about the delay. The 20 minutes that followed were among the most uncomfortable of Linda's professional life. Trapped in the stairwell with dozens of increasingly agitated colleagues, she found herself standing near Dwayne, not by choice, but because the crowd had pressed them together in the confined space. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his armrests just a little too tightly. This wasn't just inconvenience for him, it was vulnerability, dependence on the goodwill of people who had already made their feelings about his presence clear. "I'm sorry about this," she found herself saying during a brief lull in the alarm cycle. Dwayne looked at her directly for the first time since the conference room. "Which part?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications Linda wasn't ready to examine. Was he asking about the evacuation delay? The crowd's behavior? Her own words from their meeting? Before she could respond, the emergency team arrived, 2 paramedics with a specialized evacuation chair and the training to use it properly. The crowd parted reluctantly as they worked to transfer Dwayne from his wheelchair to the evacuation device. Linda watched the process with fascination and horror. The care required, the vulnerability of being lifted and strapped into an unfamiliar chair, the complete dependence on strangers for basic safety. For the first time, she began to understand what your situation actually meant in practical terms. As the paramedics began their careful descent, carrying Dwayne down the stairs step by step, Linda found herself following close behind. She told herself it was professional responsibility. She was the HR representative. She should ensure proper procedure was followed. But really, she was beginning to suspect that everything she thought she knew about Dwayne Thompson was wrong. and that terrified her more than any fire alarm ever could. The lobby buzzed with the controlled chaos of a building-wide evacuation. Employees clustered in small groups, some checking phones, others making awkward small talk while waiting for the all-clear. Linda stood near the reception desk, ostensibly coordinating with building security, but her attention kept drifting to Dwayne. He'd been transferred back to his own wheelchair and positioned himself near the floor-to-ceiling windows, slightly apart from the crowd. Something about his posture, the way he held himself with quiet dignity despite what had just happened, nagged at her. There was an authority in his stillness that she hadn't noticed before, a sense of someone accustomed to command rather than compliance. Ms. Hartwell. The building security supervisor approached with a clipboard. I need to file an incident report about the evacuation delay. Can you tell me about the individual who required assistance? Linda glanced toward Dwayne, then back at the supervisor. His name is Dwayne Thompson. He was here for a consultation meeting. What kind of consultation? The question hung in the air as Linda realized she didn't actually know. She'd assumed accessibility advocacy, but Dwayne had never confirmed that assumption. In fact, thinking back, he'd been remarkably vague about his purpose. I'm not entirely certain, she admitted. The supervisor made a note. Do you have his contact information? We'll need to follow up about our evacuation procedures. It should be in the system, Linda said, though she remembered finding almost nothing when she'd searched earlier. As the supervisor walked away, Linda found herself studying Dwayne more carefully. His suit wasn't off the rack, she could see that now. The cut was too perfect, the fabric too fine. His watch caught the light occasionally when he moved his hand, revealing what looked like a very expensive timepiece. And his phone. Linda's breath caught as she recognized the device in Dwayne's hands. It was the same model she'd seen the CEO use during the few board meetings she'd been invited to attend, a high-security device that only the company's top executives carried. A memory surfaced unbidden, 3 months ago, walking past the executive conference room during a board meeting, catching a glimpse through the frosted glass of figures seated around the polished table. She'd been focused on the financial reports in her hands, paying little attention to the meeting she wasn't important enough to attend. But now, with growing unease, she remembered seeing a wheelchair at the head of that table. Linda's hands began to tremble as pieces clicked together with horrible precision. The appointment that had appeared mysteriously in her calendar. The system access that bypassed her security clearance. The way employees had whispered about expensive modifications rather than standard compliance visits. She thought about Dwayne's words in the conference room, I think I understand perfectly what it means to work at a company like Meridian. Not the response of someone seeking employment, but the observation of someone who already understood, intimately. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the company's internal news app. The headline made her blood turn to ice. CEO Dwayne Thompson returns from medical leave, announces plans for comprehensive HR review. The phone nearly slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. CEO. Dwayne Thompson was the CEO of Meridian Corporate Solutions. The man she'd just told he wasn't qualified to work here. The man she'd called dead weight. Linda's mind reeled back through their conversation, every word taking on new meaning. His calm questions, his knowing smile, the way he'd said her treatment was extraordinarily educational. He hadn't been seeking a job, he'd been conducting an investigation. And she'd failed it spectacularly. Across the lobby, Dwayne was speaking quietly with someone on his phone. Linda couldn't hear the words, but she could see the subtle shift in his posture, the way other employees began to notice him, really notice him for the first time. A few were pulling out their own phones, probably seeing the same news notification she had. Recognition dawned on faces throughout the lobby like ripples spreading across still water. The maintenance worker who'd handled the evacuation jogged over to Dwayne, his entire demeanor transformed from professional courtesy to barely concealed panic. Mr. Thompson, sir, I am so sorry about the delay. We should have had proper equipment staged on every floor, and I take full responsibility. Dwayne raised a hand, stopping the apology mid-sentence. We'll address the evacuation procedures, he said calmly. But right now, I'm more interested in how our employees treat each other during crisis situations. His eyes found Linda's across the crowded lobby, and she felt pinned like a butterfly on a specimen board. She wanted to run, to disappear, to somehow undo the last 3 hours of her life. But her feet seemed rooted to the marble floor. Memories cascaded through her consciousness like an avalanche. The company-wide emails about their visionary leadership that she'd skimmed without reading. The mysterious board meetings she'd assumed were attended by the usual cast of elderly white men. The progressive policies that had been implemented over the past 2 years that she'd privately criticized as politically correct nonsense. All of it had come from him. The man she'd just treated like a charity case, like an inconvenience, like someone whose very existence was a burden on her carefully ordered world. Linda remembered her father's voice from her childhood. You can judge a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them. At the time, she'd thought it was just one of his folksy sayings. Now it felt like prophecy. The all-clear announcement echoed through the lobby, but Linda barely heard it. People began moving toward the elevators, the normal rhythm of corporate life resuming. But nothing would ever be normal again, not for her, not after this. She watched Dwayne maneuver through the crowd, employees stepping aside with newfound respect and recognition. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to deference, someone who'd been hiding in plain sight while she revealed exactly who she was. As he passed near her position by the reception desk, Dwayne paused and looked directly at her. "Ms. Hartwell," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily over the ambient noise. "I believe we have more to discuss." It wasn't a request. The executive elevator rose in silence, each floor marker lighting and dimming like a countdown to Linda's professional execution. She stood pressed against the back wall, her reflection ghostly in the polished steel doors, while Dwayne occupied the space near the control panel with the casual ease of someone who belonged there. Which, of course, he did. The elevator opened directly into the executive suite, a space Linda had only glimpsed during hurried deliveries of board meeting materials. Now she stood in the center of it, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city, the artwork that probably cost more than her annual salary, the quiet hum of power that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "Please sit," Dwayne said, gesturing toward a pair of leather chairs arranged near the windows. His office, because of course this was his office, occupied the corner of the building, flooding the space with natural light that made Linda's fluorescent-lit cubicle feel like a cave by comparison. Linda perched on the edge of one chair, her back rigid, hands folded in her lap like a schoolchild awaiting punishment. Dwayne positioned his wheelchair across from her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. 15 years, he said finally. "I'm sorry. You've been with Meridian for 15 years. I've read your file." Dwayne's voice carried no anger, which somehow made it worse. "Started as a recruiting coordinator, worked your way up to senior HR manager. Consistently high performance reviews. Employee of the month 3 times. Linda felt tears prick at her eyes. He was cataloging her career like evidence in a trial, and she knew what the verdict would be. "Mr. Thompson, Do you know why I was in the building today, Ms. Hartwell?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I've been CEO of this company for 2 years, but I spent the last 6 months on medical leave. Complications from my injury, nothing life-threatening, but it required extensive treatment." He paused, his fingers drumming softly on his armrest. "During my absence, I received some disturbing reports about our hiring practices. Discrimination complaints that were being quietly settled. Patterns in our recruitment that suggested systemic bias." Linda's stomach dropped. She thought of all the candidates she'd carefully screened out, all the excuses she'd crafted, all the ways she protected Meridian's culture. "So I decided to conduct some field research," Dwayne continued. "See for myself how the company operates when the CEO isn't watching. You were testing me. I was observing. There's a difference." Dwayne leaned forward slightly, his eyes studying her face. Testing implies I expected you to fail. Observing means I was hoping you'd surprise me. The distinction hit Linda like a physical blow. He'd given her a chance to prove herself, to show that 15 years of experience had taught her something about human dignity and corporate responsibility. Instead, she'd confirmed his worst suspicions about the company he'd trusted her to represent. "I'm going to be fired," she said, the words barely above a whisper. "That depends." Linda looked up, surprised by the response. "On what?" Dwayne was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the windows where the afternoon sun painted geometric patterns on the office walls. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Linda lean forward despite herself. "Do you know what it's like to become disabled at 26, Ms. Hartwell? To wake up in a hospital room and realize that everything you thought you knew about your life was wrong?" Linda shook her head, transfixed by the sudden vulnerability in his voice. "I was a different person before the accident. Arrogant, probably. Definitely impatient with people I saw as weak or limited." Dwayne's smile was rueful. "I thought success was about strength, about power, about proving you were better than everyone else. The wheelchair taught me otherwise." He rolled closer to the windows, his silhouette backlit by the golden afternoon light. "It taught me that everyone is carrying something invisible. That the person you dismiss as weak might be stronger than you'll ever be. That assumptions are the most dangerous luxury you can afford." Linda felt something crack open inside her chest. "I don't understand why you're telling me this." "Because you remind me of who I used to be," Dwayne said simply. "And because I believe people can change, if they're given the right motivation." "What kind of motivation?" Dwayne turned his chair to face her directly. "I'm implementing a new diversity and inclusion program at Meridian. Comprehensive training, policy overhaul, accountability measures. It's going to require someone who understands both the old system and the need for change." Linda stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a choice," Dwayne corrected. "You can leave Meridian with a severance package and a neutral reference. Or you can stay and help me fix the culture you helped create." The offer hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Linda could see the chasm she'd created with her prejudice, but also the possibility of crossing to the other side, if she had the courage to admit how wrong she'd been. "Why would you trust me with that?" she asked. "Because redemption requires risk," Dwayne said. "And because the person who knows where all the bodies are buried is often the best person to help dig them up." Linda looked out at the city spread below them, all those lives intersecting in ways they'd never fully understand. For the first time in hours, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. "If I stay," she said slowly, "if I try to make this right, how do I know I won't just make the same mistakes again?" Dwayne smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Because now you know what it feels like to be on the other side." The moment of grace lasted exactly 18 minutes. Linda sat in Dwayne's office, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of becoming someone better than she'd been. The afternoon light streaming through the windows felt like absolution, and Dwayne's offer of redemption seemed almost too generous to accept. Then her phone rang. "I should probably take this," she said, glancing at the caller ID. "It's my assistant." Dwayne nodded, turning his attention to his computer while Linda answered. "Linda, thank God," came Jennifer's breathless voice through the speaker. "I've been trying to reach you since the evacuation. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Linda asked, though something in Jennifer's tone already had ice forming in her stomach. "That accessibility consultant you met with this morning? Dwayne Thompson? Someone leaked details about your meeting to the company gossip network. And Linda, it's bad." Linda's eyes flew to Dwayne, who had gone very still at his desk. "What do you mean, leaked?" Rebecca from the front desk was apparently listening outside the conference room. She recorded part of your conversation on her phone and sent it to the company group chat. Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "Linda, The whole building has heard you call him dead weight. The words hit Linda like ice water. She watched Dwayne's reflection in his computer screen, saw the moment he registered what Jennifer was saying. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle withdrawal, like a door closing. "There's more," Jennifer continued, apparently unaware that she was demolishing Linda's entire future with each word. "The recording caught you talking about quotas, about finding ways to work around discrimination laws. People are sharing it on social media. It's starting to go viral." Linda's hands began to shake. "How viral?" Channel 7 News just called asking for a statement. So did the Post-Gazette. And Linda. Jennifer's voice broke slightly. "Someone identified Thompson as the CEO. Everyone knows you were talking to your own boss that way." The phone slipped from Linda's nerveless fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. In the silence that followed, she could hear the distant hum of the building's HVAC system, the soft tick of the antique clock on Dwayne's desk, and the thunderous sound of her career imploding. Dwayne reached down and retrieved her phone, ending the call with a gentle tap before setting the device on the table between them. When he looked at her, his expression was unreadable, not angry, not disappointed, just carefully neutral in a way that was somehow worse than fury. "I'm sorry," Linda whispered, the words feeling inadequate and pathetic. "Are you?" Dwayne's voice was quiet, almost curious. "Or are you sorry you got caught?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Linda opened her mouth to protest, to insist that she'd genuinely been moved by their conversation, that she'd truly wanted to change. But the words died in her throat because she wasn't sure they were true. Was she sorry for what she'd said, or sorry for the consequences? Was she horrified by her own prejudice, or horrified that the world could see it? "I don't know," she admitted finally, and the honesty felt like swallowing glass. Dwayne nodded as if he'd expected that answer. He rolled to his desk and picked up his phone, his movements economical and purposeful. Linda watched him scroll through what she assumed were messages, emails, notifications, the digital avalanche that would bury them both. 47,000 views on TikTok, he said conversationally. The hashtag #deadweightCEO is trending on Twitter. Someone's already made a meme out of my employee photo. Linda felt bile rise in her throat. "Dwayne, Mr. Thompson," he corrected, and the formality hit her like a slap. "I think we've moved past first names, don't you?" She nodded mutely, watching as he continued scrolling through his phone. His face remained impassive, but she could see tension in his shoulders, in the tight grip of his fingers on the device. "The interesting thing about viral moments," Dwayne continued, "is how they reveal truth. Not just about the people in the video, but about everyone who shares it, comments on it, laughs at it." He looked up at her then, and Linda saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench. "Do you want to know what people are saying about our conversation?" Linda shook her head, but Dwayne continued anyway. "Most of them are calling for your immediate termination, of course. Death threats are starting to trickle in. Nothing serious yet, but my security team is monitoring the situation." His voice remained clinical, detached. "But there's another thread of conversation that's particularly illuminating." He turned his phone toward her, showing a string of comments she didn't want to read but couldn't look away from. "People sharing their own stories," Dwayne explained. "Disabled employees who've heard similar things in conference rooms. Black professionals who recognize the coded language you used. Women who've been dismissed by HR managers who looked exactly like you." Each word felt like a physical blow. Linda had thought she was protecting one company, but she'd been part of something much larger, a system of exclusion and diminishment that stretched far beyond Meridian's walls. "You weren't just speaking for yourself in that conference room," Dwayne said, his voice finally carrying an edge of anger. "You were speaking for every HR manager who's ever looked at someone different and decided they weren't worth the trouble. Every gatekeeper who's used corporate culture as code for discrimination." Linda felt tears streaming down her face, but they felt hollow, performative. Was she crying for the pain she'd caused, or for the life she'd just lost? I offered you redemption, Dwayne continued, but redemption requires acknowledgement of harm. Real harm, to real people. Not just the embarrassment of being caught. He set his phone aside and looked at her directly. The question now, Ms. Hartwell, is whether you're capable of understanding the difference. Linda stared at him through her tears, seeing clearly for the first time the magnitude of what she'd done. Not just to her own career, but to every person she'd turned away, every dream she'd crushed, every life she'd made smaller with her assumptions and prejudices. The bridge he'd offered her had just burned to ashes, and she was the one who'd lit the match. Have you ever had a moment where a mistake you thought was private became public? How did facing that exposure change your understanding of the impact of your actions? Linda sat in her car in the Meridian parking garage for 43 minutes after leaving Dwayne's office, her hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. The concrete walls around her felt like a tomb, and every echo of footsteps made her flinch, expecting confrontation from colleagues who'd seen the video. Her phone lay face down on the passenger seat, but she could hear it buzzing with notifications. Texts, calls, emails, the digital drumbeat of her public destruction. She'd made the mistake of checking social media once before leaving the building. The comments were brutal, creative in their cruelty, and absolutely deserved. This is what systemic racism looks like in a suit. Imagine being so comfortable with your prejudice that you record yourself saying this stuff. That CEO showed more grace than she'll ever deserve. They weren't wrong. That was the part that hurt most. Not the exposure, not the humiliation, but the growing recognition that every harsh word was earned. Linda finally started the car and drove home on autopilot, muscle memory navigating familiar streets while her mind replayed every moment of the day. Her house, when she reached it, felt like a museum of the person she'd been that morning, someone who'd thought she understood the world, who'd believed her prejudices were just good business sense. She walked through rooms filled with the comfortable accumulation of a successful career, the furniture she'd bought with HR bonuses, the artwork she'd chosen to project sophistication, the photos of herself at corporate events where she smiled beside executives who tolerated her presence without truly seeing her. Had she ever truly seen anyone else? Linda's laptop sat open on her kitchen table, and despite every instinct screaming at her to leave it closed, she found herself scrolling through news articles about the incident. The story had legs. Racist HR manager unknowingly insults CEO was trending across multiple platforms, and journalists were already digging into Meridian's hiring practices, Linda's background, the broader implications of corporate discrimination. Channel 7 had posted a segment where they interviewed Dwayne outside the building. Linda watched with growing shame as he handled their questions with the kind of dignity she'd never possessed. "Do you plan to terminate Ms. Hartwell?" the reporter asked. Dwayne paused before answering, and Linda could see him choosing his words carefully. "I believe in accountability. But I also believe in the possibility of growth. The question isn't what I'll do, it's what she'll choose to do with this moment." The reporter pressed for more specifics, but Dwayne simply said, "Actions have consequences. But those consequences can lead to wisdom, if we're willing to learn from them." Linda closed the laptop and sat in her silent kitchen, feeling the weight of those words. What would she choose to do with this moment? The easy path was clear: disappear, change her name, move to another state, start over somewhere else. Let time dull the sharp edges of this humiliation until it became just another cautionary tale shared in HR conferences. But something in Dwayne's measured response suggested another possibility, one that terrified her more than public disgrace. She could face it. All of it. Linda walked to her bedroom and looked at herself in the full-length mirror she'd used every morning to perfect her professional armor. The woman staring back looked older, smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence that had carried her through 15 years of making decisions about other people's lives. How many Dwaynes had she turned away? How many dreams had she crushed with her careful, coded language? How many people had left her office feeling diminished, dismissed, reduced to stereotypes she was too comfortable believing? Her phone rang, and Linda recognized her sister's number. Margaret lived in Seattle, worked as a social worker, had always been the family's conscience. They'd grown apart over the years, their conversations becoming perfunctory exchanges about holidays and health updates. "Maggie," Linda answered, her voice hoarse. "I saw the news," Margaret said without preamble. "Are you okay?" The question broke something loose inside Linda's chest. "No, I'm really not." "Tell me what happened." "All of it." So Linda did. She told Margaret about the meeting, about her assumptions, about the moment she realized who Dwayne really was. She described the evacuation, the brief moment of hope in his office, and the crushing weight of discovering that her private prejudices had become public spectacle. Margaret listened without interruption, and when Linda finished, the silence stretched long enough that Linda wondered if the call had dropped. "Lindy," Margaret said finally, using the childhood nickname that made Linda's throat tighten. "Do you remember what Dad used to say about mistakes?" Linda's father had been a carpenter, a quiet man who measured twice and cut once, who believed in fixing what was broken rather than throwing it away. He said mistakes were just practice for doing better next time. The question is whether you're ready to practice. After they hung up, Linda sat in the growing darkness of her house and made a list. Not of excuses or justifications, but of names, every candidate she could remember turning away for reasons that had nothing to do with qualifications. It took 3 pages, and by the end, her hand was cramping and her face was wet with tears. Then she made another list: organizations that fought discrimination, advocacy groups for disabled workers, diversity training programs. Resources she dismissed as political correctness, now revealed as lifelines for a society she'd helped poison. At midnight, Linda finally picked up her phone and began typing an email to Dwayne. She deleted it 7 times before finding words that felt true. "Mr. Thompson, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve another chance. But I would like the opportunity to understand the full scope of the damage I've caused, and to spend whatever time I have left in my career trying to repair it. If you're willing to meet with me again, I'm ready to listen. Really listen, this time. Linda." She hit send before she could change her mind, then sat in her dark kitchen and waited for morning, for consequences, for the chance to prove that even someone like her could learn to do better. The silence of her house felt different now, not like a tomb, but like the space between one life ending and another beginning. 3 months later, Linda Hartwell sat in the same conference room where her world had collapsed, but everything had changed. The room itself looked different, brighter somehow, with new artwork featuring diverse faces and bodies, accessibility features that went beyond legal minimums, and a large window that had been enlarged during recent renovations to flood the space with natural light. But the real change was in the air itself, a sense of openness that hadn't existed before. Dwayne rolled into the room precisely at 9 a.m., followed by Janet Morrison, Meridian's new chief diversity officer, a black woman with cerebral palsy whose credentials had impressed even Linda's reformed standards. Behind them came 2 other executives and a court reporter, because this meeting was being officially documented. "Ms. Hartwell," Dwayne said, his tone professional but not unkind. "Thank you for agreeing to participate in this exit interview." Exit interview. The word still stung, even though Linda had known for weeks that this day was coming. Her resignation had been accepted, her severance package negotiated, her final projects transferred to other managers. Today was about closure, accountability, and ensuring that the lessons learned from her spectacular failure would outlive her tenure at Meridian. "I prepared a statement," Linda said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. She looked down at the papers in front of her, not talking points crafted by lawyers, but her own words, painstakingly honest about her failures and their consequences. Over the past 3 months, Linda had done the hardest work of her life. She'd attended diversity training, not the perfunctory sessions she'd once endured with eye rolls and impatience, but intensive workshops that forced her to confront the assumptions she'd carried like invisible baggage for 44 years. She'd read books that made her uncomfortable, listened to podcasts that challenged everything she thought she knew, and spoken with dozens of people whose experiences with discrimination mirrored what she'd inflicted on Dwayne. Most painfully, she'd tracked down 17 former job candidates, people she'd turned away with coded language and manufactured excuses, and personally apologized to each one. Some had hung up on her. Others had accepted her apology with grace that left her sobbing in her car afterward. 3 had shared stories that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "I want to read this," Linda said, holding up her statement, "but first, I need to say something directly to you, Mr. Thompson." Dwayne nodded, his expression attentive but guarded. The past 3 months had been transformative for Meridian as well. Under his leadership, the company had implemented sweeping changes to its hiring practices, diversity policies, and corporate culture. The viral video that had destroyed Linda's reputation had ultimately catalyzed positive change throughout the organization. But Linda knew that her actions had cost him too. The stress of managing a company-wide crisis while dealing with personal attacks and media scrutiny had taken its toll. She'd seen the exhaustion in his eyes during their brief encounters in the hallway, the weight of having to be perfect, gracious, and endlessly patient in the face of public examination. "I spent 15 years believing I was protecting this company," Linda said, looking directly at Dwayne. "But I was actually poisoning it. I was poisoning myself. And I poisoned every interaction I had with people who looked different from me, sounded different from me, or moved through the world differently than I do." The room was silent except for the soft clicking of the court reporter's keys. "I can't undo the harm I caused," Linda continued. "I can't give back the opportunities one stole or repair the confidence I damaged. But I can make sure that my failures become lessons for others. That's why I'm not fighting the discrimination lawsuits that have been filed. That's why I've waived attorney-client privilege for this interview. And that's why I'll spend whatever remains of my career trying to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." Linda looked down at her formal statement and began to read. It was a comprehensive accounting of her discriminatory practices, detailed enough to aid ongoing investigations and honest enough to strip away any remaining dignity she might have clung to. She documented specific instances of bias, explained the mental gymnastics she'd used to justify exclusion, and outlined the systemic changes she believed Meridian still needed to implement. When she finished, the room remained quiet for a long moment. Then Dwayne spoke. "Thank you for your honesty, Ms. Hartwell. Your cooperation with our internal review and the ongoing legal proceedings has been appreciated." The word appreciated carried careful weight. Not forgiveness. Linda understood she would never be forgiven, nor should she be, but acknowledgement that her belated accountability had value. "What are your plans going forward?" Janet Morrison asked. Linda had wrestled with this question for weeks. Several companies had quietly reached out, offering HR positions where her experience would be valued and her past mistakes conveniently forgotten. The opportunity to disappear into another corporate role, to let time heal the wounds of public shame, beckoned like an easy escape. But Linda had learned that easy paths led to comfortable prejudices. "I'm going to law school," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Civil rights law. I want to spend the next phase of my career helping people fight the kind of discrimination I practiced for so long." Dwayne's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine emotion he'd shown during the meeting. "That's unexpected." "I'm 57 years old," Linda said. "If I start this fall, I'll graduate when I'm 60. I'll have maybe 10 good years to practice before I retire. It's not enough time to balance the scales, but it's what I have." The court reporter continued typing, documenting this moment where consequence met commitment, where the full weight of regret transformed into something resembling purpose. As the meeting concluded and papers were signed, Linda found herself alone with Dwayne for a moment while the others gathered their materials. "I know you'll never forgive me," she said quietly. "But I want you to know that I see you now. I see your strength, your grace, your leadership. I see what I was too blinded by prejudice to recognize before." Dwayne studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing her words against her history. "Ms. Hartwell," he said finally, I hope you find what you're looking for in this new path. And I hope it helps you understand that redemption isn't something you earn from others, it's something you build with your own hands, one better choice at a time." Linda nodded, understanding that this was the closest thing to closure she would ever receive. As she walked out of Meridian Corporate Solutions for the last time, she carried with her the weight of 15 years of mistakes and the uncertain promise of whatever came next. Behind her, Dwayne Thompson continued the work of building a company, and a world, where people like Linda's former self would find no comfortable place to hide. The wheelchair squeaked slightly as he rolled toward his next meeting, but now everyone who heard it knew exactly who was coming. And they were ready to listen.